Y'all convicted and had a wrong man in prison, and I didn't deserve any of that stuff that y'all did to me.
And DNA has proven the defendant or defendants not guilty, notwithstanding a confession.
Imagine being wrongfully convicted of a crime, spending tens of years in prison for it, and then suddenly being released due to how new evidence or an overturned verdict came about. After spending so much time behind bars for something you didn't do, the emotions that come with freedom must be indescribable.
I'm an innocent man, Your Honor, and I have always been an innocent man.
The lives of innocent people who were wrongly imprisoned have been forever changed by their experiences, and although they may never get back to what was taken away, many are grateful for second chances at life on the outside. As inspiring as it is to hear stories of exonerated inmates returning home joyously reunited with family and friends, these incredible tales can also be tinged with sadness and the years lost during incarceration.
With an abiding sense of loss.
Join us as we have a look at the top 15 reactions of innocent convicts set free. Number 1. John Bunn.
My name is John Bunn. I was recently exonerated after 27 years for being accused and convicted of a crime I had no knowledge of, I had nothing to do with.
John Bunn was an African-American man who tragically and wrongfully spent more than 16 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit. Despite being only 14 years old at the time of his conviction, it would not be until 2018 that justice finally prevailed, with him eventually being exonerated from all charges. Bunn's story is one of resilience, strength, and courage. Throughout his imprisonment, he maintained his innocence, never giving up hope that he would eventually be freed.
Overly blessed and just thanking God that we reached this point.
The case against him was incredibly weak, with evidence being based solely upon the testimony of others. He was suspected of taking the life of an officer during a robbery and then injuring another one. The one who survived gave a physical description of his perpetrators, and even though Bunn did not match the description that was provided by the injured officer, he was still arrested. He would spend 16 years in prison, after which he was shifted to a correctional facility. Due to his good behavior, he was then paroled in 2006, but he still fought for justice to clear his name.
I'm an innocent man, Your Honor, and I have always been an innocent man.
After spending years behind bars and fighting for his rights, Bunn's conviction was then finally overturned, and his name was officially cleared.
At this time, the people do move to dismiss the indictment.
When the news that he was exonerated broke, John Bunn was in shock as his mind tried to process this new reality. Years of injustice had finally ended as the truth would be revealed, and John felt immense relief come washing over him. Number 2. Kirsten Lobato. Kirsten Lobato is from Nevada and was wrongly accused and convicted of a 2001 assassination of Duran Bailey in Las Vegas. Despite being sentenced to 40 to 100 years in prison at her first trial, new evidence emerged that would lead to a retrial, where she was then charged with lesser charges, for which she received a 13 to 45-year sentence. In 2001, at the age of 18, a man tried to assault her, and she then stabbed the man in his groin with her pocket knife. In that same year, in July, when a homeless man was found dead, Lobato was accused of taking the life of that man. She kept denying this accusation, but police simply refused and used her recent stabbing of a man as a confession for taking the life of Duran Bailey.
Okay, and what happened, do you recall?
I got out of my car and he came out of nowhere and grabbed me from behind.
And what did the person look like?
He was a black man, older.
Did he ever hit you?
Yes, he slapped me in my face when I was crying and told me to shut up because I was...
Where did you end up cutting him?
I cut his penis. I remember that.
Okay, and do you remember how you cut it?
No.
She kept on appealing, but her petitions were denied several times. Then, in December of 2017, after gaining significant notoriety due to the publication of exonerating evidence, Lobato's release from the Nevada Department of Corrections was ordered. However, she was kept back for another year on an unrelated incident, but later got released by the same judge, citing time served when reviewed again in January of 2019. She would spend a total of 16 years behind bars for a wrong accusation. Although her release came as a sigh of relief for her, it also serves as an important reminder about the flaws in the criminal justice system and how easy it is for innocent people to become convicted of crimes that they did not commit. Number 3. Devontae Sanford. Back in March of 2008, Devontae Sanford was wrongfully convicted on 4 deaths, 2 blocks away from his home in Detroit, Michigan. Despite the fact that Vincent Smothers confessed to the crime shortly after, prosecutors did not charge him with those specific homicides and therefore started a years-long effort by innocence advocates for justice. Finally, their efforts would come full circle when Sanford walked out of a prison as a free man in July of 2016. Devontae's case raised many questions about how everything unfolded within the criminal system. His case was quite complicated, involving high-level narcotics dealers, petty criminals, and police officers on both sides of the law. It is a testament to how justice can be mistakenly served, but also gives hope that wrongful convictions can be overturned in some cases. Devontae Sanford was wrongfully convicted for all 4 homicides in 2008, but because of his lawyer's efforts, after 8 years, the conviction would then be overturned. While this is ultimately a triumph of justice, it also reminds everyone that we have to continue to strive towards fairness in the criminal system so that similar injustices can be avoided in future cases. Sanford's reaction when he walked out free on July 19th of 2016 could not have been anything other than elated relief, having regained his freedom after spending over 8 long years behind bars due to an unjust charge. He was grateful for all who fought relentlessly to restore him to society with dignity. Devontae was hopeful about his future despite all the pain and suffering he faced while being innocent.
So from this day forward, I'm just trying to move forward and put all this.
It truly demonstrated how powerful perseverance and resilience are, even under the most dire situations. Something that will forever serve as inspiration for many more innocent people wrongly accused across the globe. Number 4. Deborah Milkey. Deborah Milkey was wrongfully convicted of taking the life of her 4-year-old son Christopher. In December of 1989, 2 men, James Lynn Stiers and Roger Mark Scott, were arrested for the crime, although neither of them testified against her and agreed that she was not present at the site of the crime. Scott implicated that Milkey was the mastermind. In 2013, a 3-judge panel at the United States Ninth Circuit Court unanimously overturned Deborah Milkey's conviction. The judges would emphasize several issues with the prosecution's case, which included that prosecuting attorney Noel Levy withheld a personnel record from the defense. In addition, questions would be raised about Detective Armando Saldate Jr. and his long history of misconduct. In March of 2015, the judge would formally dismiss all charges against Deborah Milkey with prejudice. Although she had spent over 25 years in prison, she was ultimately vindicated and released on a $250,000 bond. The case of her wrongful conviction is a stark reminder of the injustice that can occur within the criminal justice system. Despite 2 men admitting that she was not present at the crime, a detective's misconduct and withheld evidence would lead to her conviction in 1990, which lasted over 25 years until an appeals court finally overturned it. After being exonerated due to proper judicial procedures not being followed during prosecution, Deborah Milkey is now a reminder that many innocent people are probably rotting in jail because the justice system failed them. When Deborah Milkey heard those 3 magical words, all charges dismissed, after nearly 25 years behind bars for something she didn't do, she must have felt overwhelming joy mixed with deep sorrow, both for herself as well as all the other innocents who have suffered similar injustices throughout history without ever seeing freedom again.
I live with an abiding sense of loss, and a chunk of my heart is gone.
Number 5. Curtis Flowers. Curtis Giovanni Flowers was wrongfully convicted of a quadruple homicide in 1996. After several trials, numerous appeals, and a 22-year sentence behind bars, he was then exonerated by the Mississippi Supreme Court in 2019. To his immense relief, of course. The unfortunate man would spend more than 2 decades in prison before he was finally proven to be innocent. He broke down into tears when he was finally exonerated, because for him, it had been a long and tiring battle against the flawed justice system. Flowers, a father of 2, would be convicted for 4 deaths that had occurred at the Tardy Furniture Store in Winona, Mississippi. The crime had occurred during a robbery where 4 people lost their lives and 2 were seriously injured. The trial was full of inconsistencies, with key witnesses changing their stories multiple times, facts from the scene being overlooked and ignored, and insufficient evidence being used to convict Flowers.
The state has failed to convince this court that the proof of Mr. Flowers' guilt is evident.
After years of fighting for his innocence and facing multiple trials, his ruling was finally overturned by the Mississippi Supreme Court in 2019. The court would rule that prosecutors had violated the Constitution by using preemptory challenges to exclude African Americans from the jury pool. Since then, Flowers has been featured in several documentaries. He's also received awards and honors for his courage and has even become an advocate for criminal justice reform. The Curtis Flowers case serves as a reminder that the American justice system can be flawed and needs to be improved. For too many years, individuals of color have been unfairly convicted with little to no evidence, and after 22 years of a wrongful conviction, Curtis Giovanni Flowers was finally exonerated in 2019. His tears of happiness were a testament to the victory that he had fought for all those years.
I look forward to spending time with him, and I can't.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
A shining example that justice can still prevail even when everything is stacked up against you. Number 6. Luis Vargas. Luis Vargas was wrongfully convicted of 3 assaults, spending more than a decade fighting for someone to listen. First, he was sentenced to 55 years for a crime that he didn't commit, and his 16-year-long legal battle would finally pay off when the California Innocence Project took up his case and then pushed authorities to test DNA evidence. This would lead to a judge throwing out the conviction based on the victim's identification at police lineups, as it would point to another suspect. Now, despite numerous appeals being filed by Vargas from 1999 to 2002, justice evaded him until 2019, when he would be exonerated because of new evidence. Vargas's case is proof of how difficult it may be to get a guilty verdict overturned, as pleas for judicial relief are often rejected without review due to bureaucratic issues. The case also highlights the importance of DNA evidence in obtaining justice and why such evidence should be tested sooner rather than later.
Our client was excluded from the DNA on the victim's clothing.
When Luis heard about his exoneration in 2019 after the excruciatingly long legal battle against false accusations, one can only imagine how relieved and grateful that he must have felt. After spending many agonizing years fighting for someone to listen when no one would believe or give credence to his pleas of innocence, finally hearing that you are free must have been nothing short of liberating. His lips were quivering after hearing that he was a free man, and he burst into tears. He was finally reunited with his family, who had stood by him all throughout his journey, and after being freed, he asked his mother to get him a hamburger so that they could eat together, demonstrating how happy and hopeful that he was.
He told me, "Mom, when you see me, I am outside, please buy me a big hamburger and we eat it together."
Number 7. Clifford Williams Jr. After 42 years of wrongful conviction, Clifford Williams Jr. and his nephew Nathan Myers were finally exonerated when prosecutors in Duval County submitted a report from the Conviction Integrity Unit that found no evidence proving that they were guilty. Despite 40 alibi witnesses indicating otherwise, both men had been tried for taking someone's life in 1976 after Jeanette Williams would be found dead, and her girlfriend Nina Marshall identified them as the perpetrators. The physical evidence revealed that the shots had come from outside through a bedroom window. This information would be ignored by the defense counsel during the trial. 40 witnesses would testify in favor of their innocence, but the 2 men were still found guilty. They would be sentenced to the death penalty for a crime that they did not commit, but ultimately Judge Cliff Shepard overruled this decision due to a lack of supporting evidence presented against them in court. This momentous occasion is an inspiring reminder that justice can prevail over all odds, and it serves as hope to many awaiting similar releases from incarceration in the future. Clifford Williams Jr. was overwhelmed with emotion upon learning that he would be released after spending such a long time in jail. Tears would stream down his face as he heard the news and embraced those who supported him throughout his whole past 4 decades, a testament to how deeply meaningful that freedom truly is. His faith never wavered despite having spent so much time behind bars fighting for his rights, something that will continue to motivate others going through similar ordeals for years to come. Number 8. Alfred Dwayne Brown. In October of 2005, Alfred Dwayne Brown was wrongfully convicted of the shooting death of a police officer and then sentenced to death for his alleged crime. However, further investigation would reveal that prosecutors had failed to disclose key evidence in court which supported an alibi that was put forth by Brown's defense team. In late 2014, this discrepancy would lead the state's highest criminal court to overturn the conviction and send it back down to Harris County for a retrial, ultimately leading to Brown being freed from prison after 9 years. The prosecutors were unable to move their case forward with insufficient evidence presented against him. Discrepancies with the prosecution's evidence had cost Brown almost about 10 years of his life. When Alfred Brown stepped out as a free man in June of 2015, amidst cheers from family members and supporters, it would mark an emotional day for all who had been advocating for justice throughout his trial process, especially Brown himself. After nearly a decade of being wrongfully imprisoned under false charges that could have cost him his life due to capital punishment laws at the time of sentencing, he was finally exonerated. It seemed like something too good to be true when prosecutors finally decided that there was not enough evidence against him to move forward with a retrial proceeding. This in turn led them to drop their case altogether instead. In response to these developments during the exoneration hearing inside the courtroom, Brown showed deep gratitude towards those involved in helping to bring about this momentous occasion. He said, "I can never thank you or pay back what I owe." The statement perfectly encapsulated how relieved he was. Brown remained humble despite the troubling circumstances that he had faced over the past few years. Number 9. Kimberly Long. Kimberly Louise Long was wrongfully convicted in 2006 for taking the life of her boyfriend, Oswaldo Conde. In 2003, Conde would be found dead in Long's apartment, and she soon became the prime suspect. After 2 separate trials ending without a verdict due to the lack of substantial evidence, Long would be convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. However, in 2014, her lawyers discovered a critical piece of evidence that could have changed the trial's outcome entirely. They would argue that if the jury had heard about a time of death analysis, it would have raised reasonable doubt in the jurors' minds and could be fatal to the people's case. The California Supreme Court agreed and then ordered a retrial, ultimately leading to the district attorney dismissing all charges against Long in April of 2021. After 18 years of wrongful imprisonment for a false conviction, this decision finally granted her full exoneration. Long's case reminds us that even a single piece of evidence can alter the fate of some accused of a crime, and no one should be wrongfully convicted no matter their circumstances. After being wrongfully imprisoned for nearly 2 decades, one can only imagine the emotions felt by Kimberly Long when she finally received justice. She would be overwhelmed and relieved at the same time, and after suffering for several years, she was finally a free woman. Tears were streaming down her face when she heard the news of freedom from an unjust conviction due to racial bias and other wrongful practices. These powerful feelings were likely accompanied by deep gratitude towards all who had fought tirelessly alongside her in pursuit of truth and fairness throughout the difficult journey. Number 10. Ricky Jackson. Ricky Jackson, along with Wiley and Ronnie Bridgman, were convicted for robbing and taking the life of Harold Franks in 1974. Their conviction would be based on false eyewitness testimony from a 13-year-old boy. Despite having alibis backed up by defense witnesses, all three were sentenced to death until their sentences were commuted to life without parole later on. Ricky would serve 39 years, which is the longest time spent in prison before exoneration. This is longer than time served by any other person ever wrongfully convicted. In 2011, Cleveland Scene magazine highlighted inconsistencies that eventually led up to Ricky's exoneration alongside his co-defendants.
Thank you. That's all.
All right.
After serving nearly 4 decades behind bars. The Ohio Innocence Project's reinvestigation found evidence that police had actually intimidated the young boy to testify falsely when he attempted to recant his identification of the 3 defendants, and that was never disclosed to their defense attorneys. In November of 2014, Judge Richard McMonigal granted motions for a new trial that were filed by Ricky and Wiley Bridgman and vacated their convictions. The prosecution then dismissed the charges against both of them, along with the other person, and they were released after serving almost 40 years in prison for a crime that they did not commit. After spending so much time behind bars, Ricky Jackson's emotional reaction to his exoneration was one of elated joy. He felt overwhelmed at finally being recognized as an innocent man after so many years where nobody believed him or fought for justice on his behalf. He celebrated alongside family members who had never given up hope that someday Ricky would be free again. It was an incredibly powerful moment that was shared between them all, full of tears and hugs, expressing both sorrow over what he'd been through, yet also immense gratitude towards everyone involved in making it possible. Physically speaking, there was certainly some difficulty adjusting back into society while no longer having to follow strict rules within the confines of the prison's walls. Still though, overall things went much smoother than expected for all 3 men. Number 11. Richard Jones. Richard Jones was convicted of a 1999 aggravated robbery of a woman in a Walmart parking lot in Roland Park, Kansas. Although he had an alibi, eyewitnesses would identify him as the robber, despite his strong resemblance to another man. The crime involved a man attempting to steal a woman's purse, during which she fell and scraped her knees. This would make it an aggravated robbery, and Jones was identified as the criminal due to a witness writing down his license plate number, which led investigators to his home. Jones was then wrongfully charged despite having several witnesses who testified that he was at his girlfriend's birthday party. He served 17 years in prison until he finally learned of the Midwest Innocence Project, which eventually tracked down the real Ricky Lee Amos, who was strikingly similar to Jones and had lived at the address linked to the crime. As a result of this evidence, Jones's conviction would be overturned, and he received a certificate of innocence and a $1.1 million compensation for lost wages, attorney fees, and other costs. His arrest record was expunged, and he also was entitled to receive counseling and healthcare benefits for up to 2 years. Jones was finally a free man after 17 years, and his reaction showed how elated that he was.
Life, you know, they family to me. They family, not friend, they family, you know, and so I'm just grateful.
After such a difficult journey through a wrongful incarceration and court battles, one can only imagine how freeing it felt when all charges were dropped against him. There may still remain feelings of bitterness or even anger at what had happened throughout the process. After all, no amount of money can ever replace your freedom. The outcome in Jones's case is truly priceless. Number 12. Eric Kelly and Ralph Lee. Eric Kelly and Ralph Lee were convicted of a 1993 murder of Tito Marino in 1996, largely based on contradictory statements that they had made to police after being taken into custody. The interrogations were not recorded, and there are no notes of what conspired. Still, the only evidence of confession was typewritten statements that officers prepared that were signed by Kelly and Lee. Some of the information they provided to law enforcement could not be corroborated, and in 2010, a court ordered retesting of a hat that was recovered at the scene that the prosecution had maintained was worn by the assailant. Male DNA would be identified, and that excluded Kelly and Lee and matched that of another man who had recently been released from prison for committing a similar crime. This evidence, combined with the inconclusive DNA testing, lack of corroboration, and contradictory statements from defendants, led to their convictions being vacated in 2018, and that allowed Kelly and Lee to be released on bail. When Eric Kelly and Ralph Lee entered the courtroom for their exoneration hearing at long last, the air in the room was emotionally charged. Finally, after years, their suffering had come to an end.
Many instances where false confessions are given and DNA has proven the defendant or defendants not guilty, notwithstanding a confession.
Tears began to stream down everyone's faces, which included the relatives who had been fighting diligently since day one, and these two innocent individuals caught up in something bigger than themselves. It was truly a momentous occasion, not only because justice had prevailed, but also because advancements such as forensic science ensured that only the actual perpetrators were convicted. Number 13. Clemente Aguirre Yarquin.
My name is Clemente Aguirre. I'm from Honduras.
Clemente Aguirre Yarquin was initially convicted of first-degree murder and burglary in June of 2004 due to evidence that was found at the crime scene. Police had discovered a bloody 10-inch kitchen knife nearby the residence of the victims and Aguirre Yarquin's home. The head chef of the restaurant where he worked confirmed that one of their 10-inch kitchen knives was missing, but Clemente maintained his innocence throughout his trial and was convicted in 2006 anyways, sentenced to life in prison. He continued to maintain innocence while serving time, and eventually, 14 years later, all charges against him would be dropped. In November of 2018, the prosecution would dismiss the charges
to look at this case in a certain way based upon what the Supreme Court is.
Based upon new evidence materially affecting the credibility of a critical state witness. Clemente would be released on federal immigration court bond and then filed for asylum. In January of 2019, his lawyers also sought to declare him a wrongly convicted person to seek compensation from the state of Florida. Upon hearing of his exoneration from court proceedings in November of 2018, after over 14 years behind bars for something he did not do, Clemente could not believe what had just happened. It took him several moments to react as reality slowly dawned upon him. No more confinement or chains, because he was now a free man. After spending years inside of four walls without an opportunity for redemption until now, this news brought immense relief washing through every fiber of his being. He was overjoyed and overwhelmed, and tears welled up in his eyes out of sheer joy while the courtroom erupted into spontaneous applause, applauding not only for justice being served, but also for celebrating a man's liberation after such prolonged captivity away from friends and family alike. Number 14. Kevin Strickland. Kevin Strickland, an African-American man, was wrongfully convicted by an all-white jury in 1979 for taking the lives of 3 people in Kansas City and would be dealt out a life sentence. Despite the lack of physical evidence that linked him to the crime and his alleged witness recanting her testimony, he wasn't exonerated until 2021 when numerous legal figures called for it. The Supreme Court denied his petition, while Missouri's governor would refuse to give him a pardon, citing uncertainty over innocence. Finally, on November 23rd of 2021, Judge James Welsh would overturn Strickland's conviction due to unreliable eyewitnesses, and after years of imprisonment, he would be freed. This makes it the longest confirmed wrongful custody case ever seen in Missouri history. Strickland has become a symbol of justice for the wrongfully convicted and a testament to human resilience. He continues to advocate for criminal justice reform, helping those who never received their deserved freedom. After hearing about his long-awaited exoneration from prison after more than 4 decades spent behind bars, he was unable to control his emotions. Tears rolled down Kevin Strickland's face, and he was shivering with joy. His friends and family who had stood beside him throughout those difficult times rejoiced with joyous celebration, while others around the country cheered that justice had been served, despite such great odds against him all these years later. Number 15. David Ranta. In 1991, David Ranta would be convicted for taking someone's life after 6 witnesses identified him in a lineup. Despite passing a polygraph test and his defense's suggestion that another man may have been the gunman, he received 37.5 years to life imprisonment. Over 2 decades later, in 2013, new evidence would surface regarding police misconduct during his trial, which would ultimately lead to his exoneration and a settlement for $6.4 million from the city of New York. Also, an additional compensation from the Court of Claims that totaled up to $8 million due to wrongful conviction claims that were filed by him against them. Now, there have been multiple wrongful convictions in the state of New York where people were falsely accused and convicted, and it's essential to recognize the injustices and ensure that similar mistakes are not repeated. Steps such as proper investigation of witnesses, a thorough examination of evidence, and fair treatment by law enforcement must be taken to prevent innocent people from being wrongfully convicted. Upon hearing the news of exoneration inside of a Brooklyn courtroom after being incarcerated for over 2 decades as an innocent man, David Ranta was full of immense joy and relief. He was so overwhelmed by the decision that he experienced vindication and had gained a newfound appreciation for the importance of civil liberties. Ranta is now fighting to ensure that no other person contracts a similar fate and has to endure all those long and painful years behind bars for a crime that they did not commit.